Hi, I'm Mark Dunlea, and I'm the Secretary of the EcoAction Committee of the Green Party of the United States. And every year we host a webinar on the issue of Earth Day to May Day. And I'm going to give a brief overview of some of the issues, including, unfortunately, what President Trump has done in terms of his attacks on climate and the environment since taking office, and some of the things that people can do to fight back. And we'll also hear from Anthony Karefa Rogers-Wright, who is an international climate, environmental liberation, and racial justice advocate. But the main theme behind Earth Day to May Day is the importance of highlighting the interconnection between critical issues such as climate change, environmental justice, worker and immigrant rights, peace, anti-racism, and biodiversity. It recognizes that the root causes of all these problems are in fact the same, and that's the power and the greed of the 1% of the military and industrial complex of the oligarchs. Even the problem of racism, sexism, homophobia results from an imperfect, non-democratic balance of power. And in order to solve all these issues, or any one of these issues, we must solve all of them. And that is why it's so important to work together with these various movements. Right now, of course, the United States and the planet is facing existential challenges from accelerating climate change and by the determination by Donald Trump to establish a dictatorship to further enrich himself and his fellow oligarchs. Unfortunately, the role of civil society and the rule of law are rapidly being dismantled under the Trump administration. And the election of a climate denier-in-chief has undercut the limited progress in addressing global warming that had been made in recent years. Global warming for the last 2 years have largely breached the 1.5 degree centigrade target that was agreed upon in the Paris Climate Accords in order to prevent catastrophic climate change. It doesn't necessarily mean that we'll always be above the 1.5 degrees, but that we have been above it for the last year. And in fact, many politicians are now retreating to say, well, maybe 2.5 degrees is what we really should be shooting for. A lot are now predicting 3 degrees Celsius warming by the end of the century, and even in France officially, they came out and predicted that we may in fact be hitting 4 degrees, which is beyond imaginable. Already we are seeing extreme weather devastating across the planet, floods, heat waves, droughts, hurricanes, and cyclones much stronger than ever before. And even with this rampage of extreme weather across the country and across the planet, President Trump is promoting the increased burning and production of fossil fuels while blocking the development of clean renewable energy. The point of Earth Day to May Day is we need system change, not climate change, or certainly not authoritarianism. And one of the things the climate needs to do, much more the climate change movement, is to explicitly reject capitalism. Even the Pope and the IPCC have recognized that we cannot solve climate change, we cannot solve the various forms of discrimination on this planet under the capitalist system. We did want to highlight a couple of events that are taking place. Some of our members are involved in this Saturday, the 7th. I'm sorry, the Saturday in Minnesota, Saturday the 19th at 1 p.m. In Massachusetts as well, having Earth Day to May Day Ecosocialism Coalition rally in Northampton, and in Minnesota there's a large rally at the Capitol. And it's important for people to look for local ways to work on climate change. We have posted things such as climate protests, climate strikes, community climate projects, disrupting events, blocking construction of new gas lines, but even simple things about writing letters to the local newspapers, educating people about the interconnection between the issues. Join in with groups not just on Earth Day on climate, but also on May Day, which tends to elevate more the issues of worker rights and now immigrant rights. And we did briefly want to review some of the unfortunate actions that have occurred under President Trump. President Trump has declared an energy emergency, trying to give himself the authority to fast-track the construction of gas and oil projects as he works to promote drill baby drill. The fossil fuel industry donated more than $75 million to Mr. Trump's presidential campaign, though he publicly had asked for $1 billion bribe in order to protect him. And certainly he has promised to weaken environmental regulations in ways that would lower the costs and increase the profit margins of the fossil fuel industry. And it's certainly worth noting that when he did his on-again, on-again tariffs, largely crashing the American economy and the stock market and people's retirement funds, and really creating a lot of ill will with many of our major trading partners. He actually exempted the oil and gas industry, fossil fuel industry, from those tariffs, and now they're coming back and trying to get him to release tariffs on things that they're concerned about, such as steel and aluminum that goes into their production. Last week, the president also issued an executive order, frankly more of a press release, but asking the attorney general to target state and local laws related to climate and climate justice. That in his opinion is a sense of overreach, but basically he doesn't want the individual states to go after the fossil fuel companies. He particularly pointed to states like Vermont and New York, which recently passed state Superfund laws to raise a very small amount of money from the biggest polluters to pay for the damage they cause. In New York State, the 30 largest polluters over the last 30 years will have to pay an estimated $3 billion a year to help governments at the state and local level repair some of the infrastructure. $3 billion is a step in the right direction, but just the damages we're seeing in the healthcare industry in New York in terms of increased healthcare costs from air pollution from the fossil fuel industry actually tops $50 billion a year. And he's going after California's authority to ban the sale of new gasoline-powered cars. He's been quite negative towards renewable energy, wind, and solar. And one of the reasons why he particularly is, basically shut down the offshore wind expansion in the United States is because he was upset that one of his golf courses in Scotland, had offshore wind turbines that I guess he could see from the golf course, and so therefore he wants to oppose offshore wind at every step. And he's certainly going, unfortunately the courts have been pushing back, but unfortunately the president is increasingly saying he's unwilling to pay attention to court orders, but he's trying to roll back a lot of the funding, literally billions of dollars that were provided for renewable energy and climate-ready projects as part of the Inflation Reduction Act and also part of the Infrastructure Act, even though much of the money under those actually went to so-called red states. And in fact, it still goes for a lot of false climate solutions, such as nuclear power and carbon capture and sequestration. And in fact, the fossil fuel industry has been lobbying him not to cut the Inflation Reduction Act because of the tremendous amount of subsidies such as false climate solutions. We're also seeing a tremendous, as I said, promotion of false climate solutions. One of the things about the green movement in general is that we say think globally and act locally. So while we want to fight Trump at the federal level, we need to be pushing our legislators at the state and local government, city, town, counties to take action. In 2010, the Green Party of the United States launched a call for an ecosocialist Green New Deal. We recognize that in order to accomplish a rapid 10 years transition to clean, renewable energy and zero greenhouse gas emissions, real zero, not this fake net zero that allows carbon trade in and basically allows pollution fossil industry to continue in low income and communities of color by planting trees allegedly and using more fluent issues. But we understood that the Green New Deal also needed to include a just transition, basically to transform society into social and economic justice for everyone. No one must be left behind. We call for an economic bill of rights similar to what President Roosevelt, FDR, had called for in 1945 in the State of the Union address. Living wage jobs for everybody, guaranteed income, expanded and improved Medicare for all, single-payer health care, universal health care. No copays, no deductibles, no premiums. You get to choose your doctors. We spend in the United States twice as much money on health care as the other industrial democracies, and yet we tend to rank lowest in terms of quality of health care for the average American compared to all these other countries. And we also supported affordable housing, quality housing for everybody, and free college education, including the abolition of debt for college. We wanted to end capitalism and replace it with a commitment to the common good and democratic control and public community worker ownership of our economy. Our next speaker, Anthony Wright, lives in Nebraska, which is the one state in the country which all the electrical production is publicly owned. But as you point out, publicly owned does not necessarily mean an end to corruption. We need to also combine public ownership with public and democratic control. And we also need to look for local versions of the Green New Deal. Ithaca, for instance, in New York, has launched a program to finance decarbonization of all buildings, helping low income and even middle income people, moderate income people, pay for things such as air heat pumps, geothermal, energy conservation, a transition to a clean economy. And so we could go on and on, about the problems of the Trump administration. We're very concerned that Lee Zeldin, a former congressman from New York, has appointed to the EPA, which unfortunately he shares Donald Trump's anti-climate perspective. He wants the agency to reverse his 2009 finding that greenhouse gas emissions endanger human health and welfare, basically stop the power of EPA to control carbon emissions. He's gone after eliminating federal subsidies for electric vehicles, and he also wants to tremendously slash the staff at the Environmental Protection Agency, which actually is really understaffed. But at this point, we want to introduce Anthony Karefa Rogers-Wright. As I mentioned earlier, he's an international climate, environmental liberation, and racial justice advocate. He's a writer and policy expert who resides in the United States with his family and his mischievous cat, Evil Ernie. He actually joined us from Ecuador, where he was part of an international delegation observing their recent Ecuador elections, which unfortunately had a lot of improper intervention by the present government and by the military. He's a proud and active member of the Black Alliance for Peace and Movement for Black Lives. His first book, Good Friday, The Necessary Death of the United States Climate Movement and Pathways for Its Resurrection, is scheduled to be released this fall, and his radio program, Full Spectrum with Anthony Rogers-Wright, airs on the mighty WPFW network every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
The excitement and the feeling of hope when we were able to get a man who's running for mayor of New York City right now, I won't say his name, sign the nation-leading Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act into law, and also some of the loathe of not seeing that amazing piece of legislation that we fought like hell for not being implemented, through the intent of the framers, which was us, by the way, which was grassroots organizations that Mark and I worked closely with, part of the New York Renews network. And of course, fought hard for the banning of fracking in New York State. Also, these contradictions are amazing, right? Same guy running for mayor of New York City also banned fracking because we fought him like hell, bird-dogged him like hell, and didn't give up in our organizing efforts. It also was a beautiful, multiracial, multi-ethnic, working and poor people class solidarity effort that got those, I think, epochal pieces of legislation and actions passed. And of course, Mark and I worked very closely together with the Climate Mobilization Act, which of course I'm going to go ahead and say was the most aggressive decarbonization building bill in the entire country. And we're seeing that be adulterated or not exercised also through the intent of the framers. We also did something that I thought I would never see in my lifetime growing up in New York City, which was the shuttering of Rikers Island through the Renewable Rikers Act. And of course, that torture chamber of death and mayhem and dehumanization is supposed to be shut down next year. But the current mayor of New York City, and we all know what the situation there is doing everything that he can to renege on that situation. So it's all to say that this moment that we find ourselves in of Trump 2.0 should not come as much of a shock as it has for many of those who are more in the center and certainly of liberals. Those of us who are ardent eco-socialists and to the left and the hard left of the political discourse, we're not shocked at all. Even our old friend Naomi Klein has moved on from the idea of a shock doctrine. Her latest podcast is called Unshocked, that she just launched on Mehdi Hassan's News Ateo network. So all to say that through all this turmoil, it's really, really interesting. I take a paradoxical approach in saying that the Green Party is actually in an incredible position to offer the U.S. polity an actual and transformative alternative to a derelict duopoly that is driving the planet to uninhabitability, as Mark named. 1.5 does not seem possible anymore, my friends. Today, we learned about a new initiative called the Climate Realism Initiative, and I'll put an article that our dear friend and sister Emily Atkin wrote for the New Republic. And the Climate Realism Initiative is basically telling us to get ready for 3.0 degrees by 2100, year 2100, and have essentially written off the false notion Mark named false solutions like so-called net zero emissions, saying that is just simply impossible. And we have to be, honest about that. So we as Greens are offering a real alternative to a derelict duopoly. We also know that both Democrats and Republicans are driving working class people as we approach May Day as well, to the margins of poverty and rendering poor folk into basically invisible entities and pillaging their humanity. Where we also know is that neoliberalism has been exposed for the charade that it's always been. Unfortunately, we have seen far too many Democrats embrace that political ideology, starting, of course, with one William Jefferson Clinton from Hope, Arkansas. who really unleashed, excuse me, many of the policies that led to the rise of Trump, one could argue, right? I mean, where I've been traveling, I've traveled through formerly industrial Midwest towns that were supposed to be Democrat Party strongholds. And yes, there's racism, and yes, there's white supremacy, but also there is economic anxiety. And I don't want to be too reductive of that term. We don't use economic anxiety, of course, to excuse or to not hold racism, bigotry, sexism, ableism accountable. But as Green Party people, as socialists, as leftists, we also like to apply what I like to call dialectical oscillation. We have to understand where they are coming from without justifying where they're coming from. And the bottom line is that NAFTA just eradicated these many of these towns, ghost towns. You go to some of the rural areas of Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Nebraska, Minnesota, Wisconsin, places where we now have an opening because of what both parties have done to these communities, driving them to opioid addiction, alcoholism, anything to sort of escape the reality that there is no more social mobility, and they are incarcerated by this capitalist framework that is extracting from them. And now what we're seeing with this particular administration is that there's no one left to extract from except middle-class people who believed that they were safe by doing the right thing, right? Wasn't that what Obama always said? Pull up your bootstraps and you can make it, retire in dignity. And now there's no one left to extract from except for those people who have 401ks, people who have saved, and we have to be prepared to have a real discussion with those folk to prevent what's happening right now. Now, I'm a polemicist by trade. My mentor is the great Ajamu Baraka, who I'm here with in Ecuador right now, as my dear brother Mark lifted up. And so I will also say that we have to be careful of letting people be ensorcelled and seduced by social democrats who won't draw the line at genocide and attend things or over the impetus of activities and events like hands off that included things like NATO, where we all know that NATO is a big problem when we're talking about the climate crisis. We know that there's a, inexorable nexus between rising militarism and rising climate change, right? The United States military is the single biggest user of fossil fuels and the single biggest emitter in the world. We understand as Greens that we have to be anti-war if we're going to be pro-climate justice. So when we see social democrats who won't draw the line in genocide and say, I'm done with this party, and they're better at being rock stars than they are being revolutionaries, and I'm speaking specifically about Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Sanders, it really becomes time to take back what's ours. Now, it's instructive that we're talking about the Congresswoman and the Senator, because one thing that Greens have to do right now, and I hope that we will all commit to this, is we've got to take back the Green New Deal. As Mark said, people did incredible work on that. Our dear brother Howie Hawkins and a colleague, Mark, you have to remind me his name, who also writes a lot of policy for the Greens, Schwartz. I always forget his name, but
David Schwartz.
David Schwartz, right. And myself, when we came together with our dear brother Jason Cowell to write Dr. Stein, I always call her Dr. Stein. She yells at me and says, call me Joe. I can't do that. I was raised by two Sierra Leonean Jewish Africans, and I have to call her Dr. Stein or I'll get in trouble with my parents. But, I think it's important to read this to you, right? When we're distinguishing between an eco-socialist Green New Deal and what has been offered. And this is no shade. I love Sunrise Movement. I have nothing but respect. I just wish that they would have embraced the work that had already been done. So
I have 1 minute left, Anthony.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to end by saying that taking it back, that Green New Deal extends the timeline for zero emissions to 2050, redefines zero emissions to net zero, replaces tenet of democratic public ownership in energy, manufacturing, housing sectors with unreliable market-based incentives, right? Green Keynesianism does not stipulate the phase out of nuclear power, which we know is a scam, dirty, dangerous, unaffordable, and no mention of deep cuts in military spending. So I'm going to end with this, that like any Green New Deal that calls for expanding the economy instead of slowing it down and scaling it down to a solid state economy is not for us. This is the last thing I'll leave you with, a great quote, which is anyone that thinks we can have unlimited growth on a planet with limited resources is either a madman or an economist. And I look forward to being in more discussion with you all. And thanks so much for having me.